Welcome to the April edition of Seattle Revit User Group. Thank you for being here on tax day. Hopefully everybody's done with that and you don't have any last-minute trips to the post office. Which I heard about that in the news yesterday, and I guess, yeah, I did them early and I didn't need the post office. What year is it? Post office. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to get off the podium here and let our sponsor introduce the show here in just a little bit, and then actually I'm the presenter for today, and hopefully I have a continuation of last month's meeting that is interesting to everybody. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Our agenda today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build on the collaboration panel that we had last month and dive a little bit deeper, although albeit at a somewhat high level overview on implementation planning on BIM, what it actually means to get your team ready to produce a BIM that is useful downstream. And I'm going to get into a little bit of lean thinking as well and just touch on some of the things that we as general contractors look for as we are getting content from the designers. And I'm trying to tailor it towards the design community rather than the contractor community, but with the viewpoint of, at the end of the day, your stuff gets, passed down to us, and we need to do certain things with it. So hopefully it'll be interesting. Want to recognize our sponsors for the year. These are the guys up here that are executive, premier, and associate partners. This is we're very thankful to our sponsors because they make this possible. We're one of the largest Revit user groups in the country. And I think that we probably have the nicest venue of any Revit user group in the country. This is a great place. We're very lucky to have it, and I think it's all thanks to our sponsors. So, thank you very much. Very quick thank you to the Seattle Revit User Group board. These are the folks up here on the screen that most of you know who they are. They're my partners in crime. We try to put together a program that is appealing and informative to everybody, and do the day-to-day management that it takes to put these meetings together, which is not insignificant, and we're all volunteering to our time to put it together. So thank you to all of you. Really quickly, I'm going to again plug in the BIM Forum happening in San Diego in a couple of weeks. Now, this is an AGC event. I know that I keep talking about that, but it's very relevant for the entire AEC community. Don't just think of this as something that's interesting to builders. But this time it's in beautiful San Diego, so we'll be down there in a couple of weeks, and it should be a really good time. This spring, the topic is actually going to be, if I remember correctly, I believe it's transforming deliverables. So thinking of delivering your product or your end result differently through BIM. It should be really good and actually very tied to the kind of topics that we've been talking about here at SeaRUG. So it seems like the industry is kind of talking about the same sort of things. I've added a new section here, and I would like to open this up to anybody in the group in SeaRUG that has a need for something like this. Please email any of us on the board or through the meetup site. The market's really starting to heat up, and I've gotten a number of emails recently of, hey, do you know anybody that's looking for work? So I think this is a great place to publicize some of that, because maybe some of you are interested in looking for opportunities. So BRPH architects and engineers, they need an electrical designer with Revit skills, so they reached out and they asked, could you please mention something? And there's an email up there to contact if you have any interest in that. Weber Thompson is looking for a BIM manager. They're transitioning to Revit use. They do mostly, like mid and high-rise residential, and they want to get somebody in-house. You can check out their website. I believe they have a posting on the job section of the AIA website, and Cody, who's not here today, but he's a SeaRUG member, is with them and kind of the one that's looking for somebody. And yours truly, we're BNBuilders, we're growing our BIM department and need somebody to help out with BIM coordination, modeling, detailing. So anybody is as excited about concrete as I am, come see me after the show.
I want to see your ACI tattoo on the left ass.
Yeah. Inappropriate. I've moved the prize drawing slide to the beginning of the show, not meaning that I'm going to give them out now, but a lot of times this is at the end of the show and people are rushing out and we're rushing to get the show finished. So just as a reminder, you know, if you've RSVP'd, your name is in this envelope together with a couple of $25 Amazon gift cards. So don't go anywhere. At the end of the show, we will pull a name out of the hat, or rather Jesse will. And speaking of Jesse, I want to give a really huge thank you to PPI this month. And the reason for it is that we had a little bit of a rearranging of the schedule. We had to kind of switch a couple of meetings with another sponsor, and then there was an opportunity that I'll tell you about at the end of the meeting when I introduce next month's. There's a great opportunity for a SeaRUG meeting that had to do with somebody that couldn't be here this month. He's traveling from the East Coast and will be here next month on the dates that we are having our meeting. So I asked Jesse, hey, would you guys be able to switch May with April? And he said, yeah, we don't have a problem with that, but it might be too early for our technical team to put together something meaningful. So I said, wonderful. I've actually been looking to further the conversation from last month, and I could present something. So would you guys be willing to sponsor one of our presentations? And they very graciously said, absolutely, even though they have a wonderful and very capable technical team that usually does a bunch of really great presentations for SeaRUG and have over the years. But they've been great about letting us take over their month. So I really appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to let Jesse tell you about PPI for a few minutes, and then we'll get covering the ground.
Thanks, David. So has everyone filed their taxes? How many of you cheated? Just kidding. So first of all, I want to thank David and the board for having us be involved with this organization. I've talked with a lot of people around the country, Autodesk people, and they say by far that when they go to this meeting, they're absolutely amazed at the turnout and the support and the venue and the content. And it's a real honor to be a part of it, and it really is one of the best user groups we've ever been involved with. So kudos to everyone involved. So let's see. So a little bit about the PPI group. We've been in business since 1927. Obviously, we've evolved from the logging industry to machinist tools to land surveying equipment, which we actually still do today, into the electronic era. So we are an Autodesk Gold partner. We're based in the Pacific Northwest, locally owned and operated. And we have two offices, one in Portland and one in the Seattle area. So let's see. Okay, so just a couple things. We have our new training catalog coming out for our public classes. That will be I think, dropping in the mail next week. So keep your eyes out for that. And also you can download it on our website and check out our calendar there. We do offer public classes, but we also do custom implementations and that type of thing. So if you're interested, let us know, and we'll be happy to come in and talk with you about that. So here's some upcoming events that are going on. We've got some in Portland. At the bottom there in the Portland section, we've incorporated some of our Pocket 3D products that actually work with TopCon, which Autodesk now has a partnership with TopCon to develop point layout tools, data collection tools for working out in the field. So that's something that we're now offering. We'll be introducing it in Seattle here probably, I guess, in June. But for now, this is what we've got. Of course, we've got our Seattle. We are actually going out to Spokane. We're going to be doing some classes out there. We are going to have in the beginning of May, we're going to have Civil 3D for surveyors, a lunch and learn. And we'll be doing that out in Spokane. And then on the 7th, we're going to be doing a BIM for infrastructure happy hour. So if you have any branch offices out in the Spokane area, be let us know and we'll get you signed up. Some of the other things, we're not just an Autodesk reseller, a whole nother division. Really 50% of our business is laser scanning products and point layout solutions like this. So we're an authorized TopCon dealer. We have been for 30 years. We've won numerous awards over the years from TopCon. So we also have been doing a lot with Faro laser scanners. If you haven't seen the Faro laser scanner, they are minuscule compared to what has been used in the past. So I know, for instance, when this library was being built, however many years ago, I remember coming out and seeing the laser scanners that they had. They were $350,000. It took 2 laptops to run them and 3 huge car batteries to keep it powered. The Faro units now are about 9 pounds, and they are on a carbon fiber tripod, super lightweight, and they're about $45,000. So in a very short period of time, this technology has really taken off. So that is a cool product. We'd be happy to come in and do a demonstration for you guys. If you have interest in it, we can also combine our laser scanning tools, point cloud technology, with Recap. We've got a couple of people that are Recap experts, and we can show you how to convert that data, register it, and then bring it into Revit or Civil 3D, whatever product you're using. So I'm going to move on. I keep saying so. I don't know why. Who has been getting bombed with desktop subscription emails from Autodesk? Well, yeah, Solana just raised her hand. So we're getting a lot of calls, and we're getting a lot of people that are really inquiring, what does this mean? What is it all about? Over there, I've got a 7-page FAQ. It gives everything you need to know about it. It's kind of changing. It's going to change the way you do your licensing in the future. I'm not going to take 45 minutes and try to explain it in front of you today, but take one of these home. I've got my number at the bottom here. Just let us know. I'd be happy to explain to you in more detail. So I don't have much more. If you want to stay in touch, here's our information. So without further ado, David, take it away. Thank you.
All right, is this thing on? Sounds like it. All right, let me switch presentations here, and we'll go back to this. See if this works. So again, thank you very much, Jesse and PPI, for letting us do another SeaRUG presentation. That it's kind of something put together by the board, although in this case, it's mostly just something that I've taken on. So what you're going to hear today is my opinion, and I make absolutely no claims about doing this better than anybody else anywhere. But it's one view. It's also somewhat of a high-level overview of things. I try not to get into the weeds, because the minute you do, you're channeling people into doing things a certain way that maybe doesn't work for them, maybe doesn't work with their office standards, so I try to stay away from that. So really quick, our agenda for today, and I'm really wishing I had a presenter display right here. Chris, get that remodel done. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to redefine what BIM is, but I think that I need to set the stage a little bit for what we're talking about and why you would want to plan to do BIM on a project. I'm going to show you a little bit about how I am using it. I'm using BIM in my construction company. Not really going to show you any Hollywood BIM. Not going to show you anything too revolutionary. I want to be pragmatic and really talk about what we're really doing. So it's not extremely exciting, but I think that this meeting is about planning for doing it. And the reality is that we're a long ways from being able to do a lot of the cool Hollywood BIM that we see, and do it in a way that brings value and is not just cool to look at. Talk a little bit about collaborating, building on what we talked about last month, and downstream use of your BIM, which is, again, kind of like what construction companies do, what owners might do with it. Not going to get really bogged down by lean construction, not really going to talk about that, but I want to do an exercise to kind of show you a very practical way of why it's important to think lean. You know, we're not, BNBuilders, where I work, is not a particularly, we're on our way in a lean journey like most companies are, right? But to us, lean is really about common sense and not about Kaizen or other Japanese terms that you get bogged down into like the manufacturing industry does. And then I'm actually going to share every page of my BIM implementation plan with you. And don't worry, it's not 85 pages, it's just 12. And I'm going to tell you what they are and what is important to me and hopefully translate it to what might be important to you. But the idea here is not that you go back to your office and you use my template to implement BIM on your project, but rather that you, maybe a little light bulb goes off, oh, maybe I should be thinking about that, and you can adjust the pen state or whatever other template you want to use into work for your situation. We'll talk a little bit about training very quickly, what's important to train and not train on, and things that are a little bit overkill, and hopefully have plenty of Q&A. I've got enough slides that I could probably ramble on for an hour and a half, or if I start talking, I might get through it in 20 minutes. I don't know how it's going to go, so we'll make it as interactive as we can too. Really quick, I wanted to tell you a little bit about me, just because I'm going to tell you how I do things, and some of you know me, but other people might be like, who the heck's this guy? Can't be bothered to tuck in his shirt, hasn't had a good haircut in a couple months. Quite simply, I come from a long tradition in the field of architecture. For 9 generations before me uninterrupted, everybody in my family were architects. I grew up in Spain, and it was kind of the family thing. And I kind of deviated from that a little bit. I started down that path because I felt an obligation to do so, based on that family history, but I quickly realized that I wasn't interested in being a practicing architect. But I really developed a passion for the technology and the process and the tools and the delivery of architecture and everything related to it, which has afforded me to be somebody who's been able to float from architecture company to engineering firm to owner. And I've worked in a lot of environments where either design build or where the lines were very blurry. So working for a construction firm kind of comes very natural to me, and the whole process from beginning to end is something that I've been involved in just about every step of the way for, brace yourselves for it, 20 years now, or I should brace myself for it, I guess. And when I started thinking about it, I've got stuff built on 5 different continents. That's kind of cool. I never really thought about it before. Currently, I'm Director of Innovation at BNBuilders, and that's a very vague title, and I kind of like that because it means I can do whatever I want, and it fits just about anything. I'm also your board president of this lovely group, and I'm involved, I was co-creator, and I'm involved with Game Plan Cloud, which is a project management and collaboration online tool that kind of leverages social media-like behaviors and things like that, but that's in its infancy. Some of the larger companies that I've worked at that might be more recognizable, Westfield is the largest retail owner and landlord on the planet. And I worked for them for a good number of years. Olsen Sundberg Kundig Allen, when Allen and Sundberg were still with them, was my home for a number of years too, and that was a great place to be at. And now BNBuilders is really where I have found a really good home. So anyway, that's me, and enough about me. What the heck is BIM anyway? Well, just go to Wikipedia, right? I mean, Wikipedia is the source of all truth for everything. So, if you look at Wikipedia or Google or anything else, you're going to get the sense that BIM is about technology and BIM is about 3D models. And to a large extent, that might be true, but I don't entirely agree with that, and I think that BIM is a lot more than that. So, I want to show you something. I mentioned my family tradition. And every once in a while it comes in handy. So I've got here, and unfortunately this is not something that everybody's going to get to take a look at very close up, so that's why I have up on the screen the last page. So this is dated, Lana, would you?
1782.
Yeah, 1782. This is hand-sewn. And it says on here, this is a project narrative for the Aqueduct of Malaga in southern Spain. This is with the king's permission and to be paid for by the bishop of the county. It's great. And when you go through this, and I have to do it very carefully, you realize that there's an entire narrative about this project, handwritten. And there's some calculations and some accounting. Some more narrative. Some calculations in the back here. And then there's this beautiful, you hold on to that very gingerly. What's up there on the screen basically is this fold-out, hand-drawn plan that has the topo, the plan, the cross-section, and a bunch of details of the little gatehouses along the way. So the reason why I show that, thank you, Lana, this is BIM. This is one single source of truth for that project. Now, this is the 1782 version of BIM. We have slightly more advanced tools, but this is, for better or for worse, a better building information model than many that I receive or come across my desk in my business today. So there are many factors for that. You know, projects are pretty complex nowadays, and this, all in all, is a relatively simple project, and the accuracy of this thing, one could argue, is probably not to the level that we have today. But the point's still valid. You know, it's one place where somebody has thought of gathering all the information about the project. So that is BIM to me. So how do we take that and bring it forward and make the 21st century version of that? It's debatable and the tools are different, but that's what we should be striving for. So it's difficult to talk about BIM implementation and not really talk about IPD and contractual methods and things like that, because the two complement each other really well and go hand in hand. It's very counterproductive to do BIM of any kind in its own silo and its own environment. So you got to talk about the ecosystem, right? BIM is a tool that's opened up the door for collaboration, opened up the door for people to really interact with one another in a different way. And the BIM ecosystem is just, this is just a sample of different logos of companies that have software that touch the process. So, it can get a little bit overwhelming. But BIM is not just Revit. That's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, I guess. The other thing that's difficult to get away from is the McLeamy curve and all this circular thing that you get from Autodesk when you search, BIM and you come up to the Autodesk website. They have that circular thing. And that's, again, because it's part of a larger life cycle. And you might be particularly interested in just one aspect of it, or maybe you're just down here. But it's all part of a cycle of an industry that's shifting and changing very dramatically. So we're all part of that, and I think most of you in this room are probably excited about that and think that it's a good thing. That's why you're here. And we all, of course, know about this, so I won't rehash it, but you gotta put it into a BIM conversation, I think. So without necessarily redefining what BIM is, I had the Wikipedia version of it earlier up there, and while it's true, I like to think of BIM as building intelligence modeling, and by intelligence I mean what's in here. Everybody that's got something to do with the project, That's really what matters. It doesn't matter that the model is one way or another. The model is one way or another because somebody made a decision, based on some factor that their expertise allows them to interpret and turn into that wall needs to be here, whatever that might be. Capturing all that and making it available to the next step in the life cycle is really what BIM should be about and what the BIM tools should be allowing us to do. And you can't do that if you're just working on your piece of it and thinking of your deliverable. So in planning for BIM, you kind of have to think a little bit of the bigger, wider picture. So let's see, what's next? All right, so what we're doing now, I often find most people practice BIM in their own silo and then don't necessarily talk to anybody else about it. Even design teams that have consultants that are working in Revit, and there's an architectural Revit and there's a mechanical Revit, more often than not, the models are created completely independently. They might be linked, but there wasn't a whole lot of conversation ahead of time of how should we all set up this model environment so that our coordinates match and all that other stuff, right? So, and this is the part where I think I need to look at my slides a little bit when I talk, so I'm really wishing for that presenter. Anyway, so the low-hanging fruit of BIM really is to coordinate the design, right? So we have 3D models, we can put them together. Once we figure out the origins, we can use the software to tell us if there's clashes. So we can start to design, you know, our building systems to work. And I'm not talking about construction sub-trade coordination, but rather design coordination. BIM's a wonderful tool for that. But again, you kind of have to put some thought into how you're going to interact with your consultants and what level of development they're going to take things to in order to do that efficiently. You know, one of the things that I'd really like to get away from is this environment where we talk about coordination, we're saying that we're coordinating the design, but what we're really doing is we're providing a typical detail for something and not really looking. Now, this is a set of parameters, and it's entirely possible that the project has all these different types of penetrations through them, but this doesn't necessarily tell you whether that works or not. You know, so to be able to look at a model in this context where you see that, and that's very clear, and I'm not a structural engineer, so I don't necessarily know if that's a problem or not. Maybe it's not, but a structural engineer would. And oftentimes, we have these kinds of conversations on a call that's supposed to be an MEP sub-trade coordination where we see stuff like this, and it's like, wait a minute, that probably could have been caught during design, and it would save us a lot of heartache right now. So, you know, living in that model environment allows you to do that a lot more efficiently, because I don't care how good you are as an engineer, MEP structural, or as an architect, if all you're looking at is plans and, you know, RCPs and things like that, you're not going to catch everything. It's just not humanly possible, you know, despite what your best intentions to do so might be. You know, beyond that, you know, the downstream use would be, you know, we take it to the next level in detail and we bring in our subcontractors, and if we're lucky, we're working on a negotiated project or a GCCM, for example, if it's a public process or a public project here in Washington. And we have time to do stuff like this ahead of construction, where we're adding, you know, individual conduits into the model. And we have our trade partners add, like the orange over here, that's refrigerant piping. There was none of that in the design model. And that takes up a huge amount of room. So it makes a huge difference when it comes to coordinating the trades and to making sure that everything fits. So we can add a great level of detail, and it's great when we can do this ahead of time. More often than not, this happens when there's a hole in the ground and somebody's waiting for us to give them information. If somebody needs to start building something out in their shop, you know, that's very typical. So the earlier we can do that, the better. And I can tell you, this is a project where we have been doing this sort of level of detail coordination for weeks now, and we're still dealing with design issues. You know, we have not actually run a clash on this to see if we have clashes everywhere. Right now, we're still trying to figure out where to route things. Things that, to be quite honest with you, should have probably been done at a SD or early DD level. But somehow they keep getting pushed back, and you know, they keep getting pushed into the, oh, well, it's a GCCM, so the trade partners will catch it. Well, yeah, they're catching it, but pretty late in the process. You know, so it would be great to leverage the model to do some of this earlier. Now, that doesn't mean you have to put in all that pipe, but you know, that's just an extruded rectangle with a couple of bends. You know, that's not difficult to put in. That's schematic design level of detail there. So let's see. Another example of a downstream use when we start adding detail to things. And when I start talking about planning and show you our implementation plan, I'll share with you what it takes to be able to get to that level of detail on the interior frame partitions. Now, that right there is not for shop drawings, it's not for prefabrication, right? That's for coordination. We want to make sure that if we have big ducts running through the walls, that we actually prepare the studs where they need to be in order to not conflict with that, and where we're going to have penetrations really account for them. So that's because we are hoping to prefabricate those. Now, those will get detailed out even to a higher level, but you know, that's the level of detail that we're taking models to on a daily basis. And again, I said this is not that exciting and that sexy when it comes to BIM. I mean, this is not what Autodesk would be showing you, but this is what we're doing day to day. At the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is to take the workload and the material that usually happens out on a job site working like this and move it to an environment where you're in a nice controlled, climate-controlled environment and working here. You know, when you have people who can prefabricate in a manufacturing environment, just to give you an idea, you've got things that change very drastically, like just the ergonomics of doing this versus doing this. Guess what happens to your insurance rates when you have a safer work environment? So that's just to kind of give you an idea of kind of the things that your models affect downstream and the type of things that, that we're thinking of. Now, prefabrication, you know, I have an example up here that's, you know, everybody loves these multi-trade racks, and if you're doing a great big, you know, billion-dollar healthcare project, chances are you have some of these, and chances are that you're actually thinking about design with that in mind. Now, that is kind of an extreme level of prefabricating, putting everything, you know, together in one rack that gets out there and gets bolted up, and you've got multiple trades working together in one workshop. Now, that's great, but that's a very specific use of it. Now, it doesn't, you know, prefabrication doesn't have to mean just that. Just, you know, frame partitions that are pre-assembled with the electrical whips included in them, and that is prefabrication as well. So there's, you know, there's prefabrication and there's prefabrication. You know, then there's also, if you have some VAV boxes, maybe in a system that has nothing to do with multi-trade racks. It's individually placed up duct, and you have a VAV box. Well, you can receive that out in the field in 15 boxes with a bunch of fasteners, and you have to go all over the place, or you can receive that VAV box in one package with the connections made and capped and protected, and every piece of hardware that you need to install that included in a little baggie that goes on it with a tag and a barcode, and it knows exactly which one it needs to go. And the person who's assembling that VAV box in the field and making the connection has everything they need to do that in that packet. You know, a lot of our subcontractors are very advanced at doing that. So that's prefabrication. But you can't really do that if you don't have the confidence that what you have in the shop is going to fit when you get out there. So that's why it's important to really plan for BIM and to do it in a way that gives you a good result. Just some examples recently of, you know, this, and this is very simple stuff, but, you know, we self-perform concrete. Typically, we go after it on all of our projects, and we're pretty good at getting it. And so one of the things that we do is we detail concrete. Like I said, I like concrete. It's easy to model. It's straight lines for the most part. Curves are pretty easy to deal with. You know, we've got guys out in the field that need lift drawings and need certain dimensions. We're doing more and more point layout and going out there with total stations and laying things out, yes. But at the end of the day, you know, we still, we like to produce drawings that have dimensions to certain known control points. So, you know, we like to take things to this level of detail in modeling. I mean, the little wood strips are modeled, the slab insulation is modeled, the slab edge is modeled. You know, all that stuff's in the model. And then I can create plans, I can create sections, I can create details from the model just with one click. And then all I have to do is maybe dimension and annotate. But the model is what drives everything. We take the structural package and we model it to a really high level of detail. Talk a little bit more about this when we talk about planning. And then one thing that's pretty important for us is being able to leverage the BIM information out in the field. Now, I showed you the 1782 version of BIM. Now, I also believe that a well-created set of PDFs with hyperlinks in Bluebeam Studio, that's part of BIM. That's, in fact, how we manage as-built conditions. As we go through the job, a project engineer will update these projects and, you know, include any ASI or RFI response in another PDF package and hyperlink it. So at the end of the job, we can hand over to the owner one PDF that has links that are live and active to everything with exactly how the project went and got done. So that's a pretty traditional workflow with RFIs and things like that, and it's 2D based. But because we're using Bluebeam Studio, it's a one single source of truth. There isn't another PDF floating around that somebody can get into, and all of a sudden you're looking at the wrong version. So that to me is part of BIM. And then, the obligatory tablet with 360 glue, you can look at models out in the field. I've seen very good, very experienced concrete guys form a wall wrong because there was a leader or a extension to a dimension line that made it look like there was a line at a certain point in a drawing. Whereas there's no ambiguity. The minute that you look at a model and you spin it, you realize, oh, that wall is sloped. You simply get it. So mobile access out on the job sites, most contractors nowadays use, some kind of data vault. You put them up on every floor, and anybody that has a question about anything can go, and on the desktop there is one icon. That's the current model for Naviswork. Another one is the current PDF. Single source of truth. Nobody can possibly get into the wrong version of the information. But that takes very targeted and very deliberate management of those files to make sure that everything is what it should be. All right, so I want to do something. I'm going to take a little digression here from the topic and talk about lean a little bit. And I'm not going to talk to you about lean construction. I'm not going to try to sell you on the fact that you should be doing lean construction. What I'm going to do is an exercise to show you the value of it. And I have a quote up here from one of my favorite people. Complexity is your enemy. Any fool can make something complicated. It is hard to keep things simple. I'm going to show you why it's important to keep things simple. I need to get my stopwatch out. And by stopwatch, I mean cell phone, of course. All right, so we're going to do a little exercise. Some of you might have seen this. If you have, keep the solution to yourself. Let everybody else have fun. So you're about to see a set of numbers on the screen. And I promise this is the only thing I'm going to make you do that has to do with lean construction, and I'm not going to use a single Japanese term. But this is pretty powerful, I think. You're going to see a set of numbers. Now, your job as subcontractor number 1 on this project is to find every number between 1 and 49 in correct sequence. So don't go looking for 49. Look for 1, then look for 2, then look for 3, then look for 4, et cetera, et cetera. And keep in your mind the highest number that you get to. You have 20 seconds. All right. So somebody in the audience that thought they did particularly well, what number did you get to? 4? 7. It's not bad. Anybody else? All right. So you probably noticed that there were numbers in there above 49, right? So the first thing we're going to do, let's take away the clutter. Let's take away those sheets where there's a detail crossed out and it says not used? That's a number we don't need. Now, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there are other uses for it, but I believe that comes from a time when to renumber a detail was a huge deal. You had to go through all your sheets and you had to update all your callouts, so it was a lot easier to cross out the detail and say number 13 is not used. But what does Revit do really, really well? If you go on a sheet view and you change the number of a detail from 9 to 12, what happens to all your references? They update automatically, right? So let's get rid of the not used. So let's get rid of the not used and do the same thing again. Let's see if we do any better. So again, you're going to have 20 seconds to find numbers 1 through 49 in sequence. Should really have music for this. All right, did we do better? Anybody? How high did you get? 11? 14? Yeah, you're a pretty average group. All right, so yeah, most people get to about 11. I had somebody get to 17 one time. I think he had gone through it before. All right, so let me let you in a little secret. There's some organization to this. There's a method to the madness. If you were to divide that screen full of numbers into 9 boxes, so you got 3 horizontal and 3 vertical divisions to that. So it would give you a grid. Number 1 is in the bottom left. So it would be somewhere around here. Number 2 is the bottom center. Number 3, or left center, left top would be number 3. Number 4 would be in the middle bottom. And then you work your way up like that. So that's, this is part of the 5S, but I promised that I wouldn't get into lean terminology, so I'm not going to tell you what the 5S are all about. I just kind of want you to see the effect of it. So let's actually make that organization happen. Let's put those things in their place, and I've told you where they're at, and I'm going to graphically show you. So I'm willing to bet you're going to get much higher numbers this time. So let me get my stopwatch out again, and let's go for another 20 seconds. All right, any better? 31, that's pretty good. All right, so let's try something a little bit drastic here. These numbers were all over the board. Let's see how quickly you can get to 49 now. Right? Okay, so let's try something else. I've taken 2 numbers away, so there are 2 details in my set that are missing. They somehow got dropped. They didn't make it onto the set, but there are 2 details that are being called out somewhere on the set, and they're nowhere to be found. So you've got 20 seconds to find the 2 missing details, or by details I mean numbers. There are 2 numbers somewhere between 1 and 49 that are missing. So 20 seconds. Should I go the rest of the 15 seconds that are left, or should I just move on? Because you're not going to find them, right? All right. So we didn't find the missing numbers. I can put this away. How about now? All right. So yeah, this is kind of a cute, fun exercise. If you go to a lean construction class, they'll make you watch this, but it's got a dude in a plaid shirt and a hard hat, cartoon character narrating it, and it's a little bit more entertaining than if I'm talking, but he doesn't really liken it to details on a set, so I thought that I would do it myself. So I had, in creating that very simple concrete model that I showed you guys a little bit ago, I had to go to 7 different places to find the information I needed. There was one drawing that referenced the structural drawing. The structural drawing had a section cut through it, which took me to another sheet that had a detail on it. That detail was a typical detail, so it called out a table to go look at based on the size of the slab, what the thickness of the slab edge. Oh, I'm getting exhausted just talking about it. You can imagine how I felt looking for it. So the likelihood that I'm going to get it wrong because it's so difficult to get it, it is very high. And again, it's the kind of thing that it could have been modeled. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. I'll kind of show you exactly what I did to model that, which is not as painful as you would think. So anyway, let's talk about planning for BIM. And here's where I'm going to get into some of the tools specifically that I use to plan for BIM on a job. Now again, I'm a general contractor, so I plan for BIM in a certain way. I have certain needs. And I think that we're getting better and better as an industry to incorporate other people. We have our subcontractors very involved in this process now. We are getting our owners very involved in this process now. And we actually have a couple of projects where we have a GCCM school project where we had this conversation with the architect and the M&E teams at the SD level. So that's great, and that's kind of the point. Let's get this earlier, the earlier the better. So let's plan to not be in a silo. Let's involve everybody that's going to be a stakeholder on the project, whether they're going to model or not. Just because they're not contributing a model doesn't mean that they don't have information to what the process could be. Involve your client, right? That's very important. Now, I would like to extend that from your client, not just meaning the owner of the building, the person paying for it, but your client could be somebody else within the team. Like, for example, my concrete crews are my client, so I need to involve them in my BIM planning. So that's very important. Do it as early as possible, and then use the tools that are available to you to do it. And I'm going to show you my BIM execution plan, talk over it. But before it, one exercise that I do that I find very, very useful is to do a BIM A3. Now, A3 is a really fancy term. It's very technical. It means an A3 size of paper. It's 11 by 17. All that means is that it's an 11 by 17 piece of information where you gather stuff up. So what is my BIM A3? Well, it often goes into the back when you start putting more information into it, so it's not really an A3, but I'm trying not to do an A0. That would be kind of overkill. But some things that are important to me in this BIM planning process. Some background, what are we doing? Have we been asked to do BIM? Do we need to do it based on some other requirement? Is it just because it's our nature to do it, our practice? What kind of level of sophistication do our partners have on this particular job? All those kinds of things about the project. Background about the project, gather all of that up. And again, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. This happens with the involvement of everybody that's going to be participating. This gets kicked around, and even though it's just an 11 by 17 piece of paper, this takes, not actively working on it, don't get too scared, but it takes a couple of weeks to get this right because it has to bounce back and forth between different people. So amount of time worked on it, maybe an hour and a half, but it just takes a couple of weeks to get it back. Current condition, anything having to do with the parameters of the project. So one of the current conditions for me, for example, is that BIM is not innovative. BIM is not new. BIM is the standard of care. That is one of my current conditions. I disagree with anybody that comes to a team and tells me, oh, well, no, BIM is some new thing that we're trying out. No, you're trying it out. BIM is not new. I created the first 3D model of piping to coordinate with a steel staircase in 1994 in 3D. BIM is not a new thing. So even by Revit standards, BIM's been adopted wildly for well over a decade. Goals, very important. What are we trying to do? What are our goals? What are our clients' goals? What are our partners' goals in the modeling effort? Identify all that. Phasing or timing, when is this going to happen? At what point in the project are we going to start doing these things? And then the biggest piece is the proposed plan, and this is typically what ends up getting fleshed out in the execution plan. Those things are where you start to put the detail. Now, a lot of times I start putting a lot of detail in here in the A3, and that's why I have to go into the back. But all that stuff gets spelled out in the execution plan later on. So, an example of that, for example, is a proposed plan. We're going to have no plan tables at the job trailers. There's going to be physically no space to put a printed set of plans, because a printed set of plans is an outdated set of plans. So instead, we're going to build, 2 huge 48-inch monitors, big, powerful computer where anybody can pull anything up from the, cloud environment or whatever environment we're using to share the models. And lastly, follow-up. Some kind of how we're going to measure how we're doing. Are we going to get 6 months into this and the project is behind and we're not doing anything with this and the model's been abandoned and nobody is going to have said anything? No. We're going to figure out a way in which we're going to keep each other accountable. We're going to say, hey, you did not submit models this week. What's going on? Is there something preventing you from submitting models this week, or is it just it's taken longer? Whatever it is, you need to be able to allow for figuring out what that issue might be, whether it's an issue or not. Maybe it's just the natural flow of things. Maybe that person didn't have anything that week. But you got to have a mechanism in there for being able to say, halt, there's something, we're going off the rails. And maybe those rails need to be readjusted, but you're not going to know if you're not constantly talking and evolving about this stuff. And that becomes a lot easier and a lot less cumbersome and a lot less time-consuming when you are making BIM part of your daily work and you're working with it. So that's the A3. It's as simple as that. Now, the execution plan is where you put some detail behind those things and you actually spell out how you're going to do it. Now, I will say our BIM execution plan and our A3 become part of the contract. We include that with any sub-bid package that goes out. People know what they're looking at. People know what they're going to get into. In the event of things being bid out, of course, because I just told you, we draft that, together with our subcontractors that are involved. But those that aren't, those that come later to the game, or if it's a project where maybe it's not an M&E CCM, for example, those things get built into the contract, that get put out there, and they evolve, and every time they evolve, the change gets uploaded back up to the contract so that people know that this is part of it. So you can go online. Some of the more popular ones, probably VA BIM guide's a little bit outdated. Penn State came up with an execution planning guide that's very thorough, and you often end up with execution plans of 75, 80, 85 pages easily. Now, I believe that an 85-page execution plan is just like that set of paper on the plan table. It's outdated. It's not live. People are not going to read it. People are not going to look at it. It's full of stuff like this, and full of stuff like this called matrices, which might be good. But quite frankly, I don't feel the need to put a graphic in my execution plan that says, upload model, clash. If clash-free, move on. If there's a clash, go back and remodel. We all know that, right? We don't need to identify that, write it out, put a little diagram of how we're going to do that. So anyway, I've blurred a few things because I have some actual project information in here, and I'd like it to, out of respect for the not so innocent, would like to leave it out. So this is my BIM execution plan on an active project. So, I mean, I'm not covering anything other than project-specific stuff. This is really how we do work. And like I said earlier, this is just my approach. I don't know that it's any better than anybody else's, but it's the one that's working for us right now. And I'm happy to share it with everybody. Table of contents, yeah, nothing exciting there. Okay, guiding principles. It's one of the first things that we talk about, overview and guiding principles. There's some important things up here. So all team members are working towards a common goal, which is the successful outcome of the project. Remember, I said this becomes part of the contract. We're all agreeing, we're adults, and it's kind of sad that we have to spell this out, but we do. And it becomes, like I said, part of the contract. There's another one in here that I wanted to highlight. Let's see, which wasn't. Oh yeah, each entity is responsible for modeling their scope. Level of detail and extent of the modeling is left to the discretion of each entity unless otherwise specified, with the understanding that modeled elements will take priority over non-modeled elements. Now, of course, this is a little bit geared towards subcontractors, right? But you can kind of make the leap towards, design models and information too. But essentially what that sentence says, and this is something that I say at every kickoff meeting, which maybe it should have been part of the bullet points, right? We always do a kickoff meeting with all the team members to go over this, make adjustments, and we talk about this often. So I always say, look, Mr. Electrical Engineer or electrical subcontractor, you don't want to model 1-inch conduit? That's your call. But know that by modeling a 1-inch conduit, you are taking space for that 1-inch conduit. You are reserving your space in the airspace of this project. You're saying this 1-inch circle in the air is mine. If you don't do that and somebody puts something there and then you need it, you are responsible for fixing the clash. And if they need to move because there's absolutely no other way to go around it, you're paying for them to move their duct. So model the 1-inch conduit. It's easier to model the 1-inch conduit. Now a lot of people say, hey, I've got wide open space, there's nothing here. It's just a 1-inch conduit that's straight, man. Then how hard is that to model? Come on. These are not, these, at the end of the day, I'm a very simple person. I'm not that bright. These are not complicated concepts. All right. One thing that's kind of important here is, and this is a little bit more abstract and difficult to enforce, right? But model conflicts and RFIs will be resolved in a collaborative and proactive manner rather than thrown over the wall. So our coordination calls end up being that kind of thing. We're not really, this morning before SeaRUG, I had our coordination call for a project that we have, a pretty sizable project. It's pretty complicated. 100-year-old building that's been hacked up in many different ways over the years, and now we're trying to do something else to it, right? So we have this 2-hour slot every Wednesday morning to go through coordination. Now that doesn't mean we look at clashes. I don't go into Navisworks and look at the list of 600 clashes and go one by one, say, how do we fix these? Now those calls, I basically drive the model where people want me to go. And I let the electrical subcontractor ask the architect questions. I let the mechanical ask the mechanical designer questions. And we look at things and resolve them in a model environment. That's why those calls are all about. By the time we're done with that, I'll hit clash. There'll be 600 clashes that will boil down to 13 real ones, and those will probably be fleshed out without even needing to involve the design team, because at that point, we've made all the design decisions. So that's how we deal with RFIs. We don't write any. We look at the model together with the architect and the engineer on the call. So if there's an RFI, it gets asked and it gets answered right there. Now, of course, sometimes you have to go and get input from somebody else, or the owner has to weigh in, or something has to fit, it deviates from the spec of what they've asked you to do. So obviously that has to be captured somehow. And we do that, I'm not gonna do a sales pitch for our game plan system that we develop, but that's what we do that for. We capture and we put it in an environment that works a lot more like Facebook, so you get notified that, hey, there's an RFI for you, and it's persistent, and people can go in, and it's not just an email. Because at the point that it becomes an RFI, it's important to keep people accountable for this not thrown over the wall thing. And email is the best example of throwing something over the wall that you're ever going to see. So then, we put a little bit of project information, the project number for the particular entity. Now this might grow if there are different partners in here that have different project numbers. Project numbers is something that's going to fit your office standard. A lot of times you might see a file come across that has a project number on it, or an email or something gets referred to with a project numbers. It's important to identify them. We'll talk a little bit more about file naming in a bit. But so then I start getting into a project key and levels and things like that, and defining zones and things like that. So that's a little bit less relevant to the design process, right? So I thought this would be a good place to start talking about things like project properties, making sure that everybody's models have this kind of stuff in Revit filled out is kind of important. Getting together to actually fill this information. Dealing with design options. Are there going to be any? What are you going to call them? Are you dealing with phasing? What are you going to call those things? It's important to talk about those things just from a standpoint of sharing models. Revit's actually a pretty lousy file to share with somebody, because if you've not created the file, if you've not created the database, you're very ill-equipped to go into a Revit model and really extract the right information. You can't be sure that what you're looking at is what you should be looking at, because there's a bunch of different set of parameters that you can change that affect visibility of objects, and you gotta just spell those out. What are we going to do? And if that changes, at some point you add a phase you didn't realize you were going to have, come back in here and add it, Same thing with work sharing, work sets or something. When we get a Revit file from somebody, there's usually some kind of an issue with work sets, or I can't get into something's locked, or I can't look at a view because it's locked, that kind of thing. So again, I'm not particularly a fan of, I like to link people's Revit models, but I don't like to get into people's Revit models because I'm not well equipped to interpret how they've been done. Links, where all the links are going to be, what links should we be expecting in a model, who's linking into what. This is just file organization. It kind of goes back to that exercise of the lean construction earlier, right? It's like, keep it simple, make sure that everything is there where it should be, and document it. Then we actually say, we need to plan for this stuff. What's the timing? Now again, being a contractor, this has more to do with my process and design. This is going to be a little bit different, but what you have here is our bid packages, when are they getting awarded? Well, I can immediately see that our HVAC package is going to get awarded well after we've had our kickoff meeting, and our fire protection is going to come in 3 weeks into our coordination effort. That's not going to work. So I use this to graphically show the project manager, can we buy out the fire protection earlier? Well, they're not a long lead item. They are for me. Put them up there. There's no reason not to. Some people, like the HVAC package was not bought out right here because there was specification that said they needed to have 3 weeks to look at the plans. Good enough. So then we adjust. Let's be honest about the fact that doing this stuff costs money. If BIM is your standard of care and you're using Revit and that's all you're using it, maybe it's not. But if you're adding services because now you're going to have an architect that's going to have to be involved in coordination, you got to account for those 2 hours every Wednesday morning. You got to, by the way, the numbers aren't real and they're in yuan as well, so I just figured I'd take it out of dollars to make it more interesting. But yeah, I didn't necessarily want to show you on my cost structure. So.
There's no fee for us. Architects work for free. We're good with just showing you.
Well, but that's a good point. You're the one talking to the client early on. There might be some sales that needs to be done, and if you have a contractor on board, maybe we can help you do that. But there's a lot of savings to be had by doing this right, and a lot of owners are getting smart enough. University of Washington is very upfront about saying, we will spend $250,000, $500,000 on this if it saves us time and effort later on. So, but you got to be open book, upfront about it. You know, these are the hours that I'm going to spend working on this project, doing this process we're describing in this implementation plan. That's important to be open and honest about. This really relates to the lean exercise we did earlier. Come up with a file naming structure that makes sense. If I get a job where, what does that mean? I don't know what that is. You know, fire protection, yeah, okay, level 3. What level 3? You know, these are all things that are typical because people use their office standards and name stuff. You know, just very simple. Project number, real, not at all invented project, little discipline key, levels. Just document that. Ask people to upload this kind of stuff. If your Revit models think they're in Boston, you've not gone into this dialog box to change it, because that's the default. You know, again, you know, grid system and origin. You know, shared coordinates do not work very well once you get out of Revit. So the first thing I usually do is I take an architectural model, if that's where we're going to go from, export out the grid to AutoCAD, and that's the file that becomes the master grid, and whatever that 00 is, that's the 00 that gets imported. That way we can all line things up. Yeah, then we talk about coordination, what the goal is here. We've defined these things in the A3. We put a little bit more meat into it. Again, you know, they model everything to the right size and dimension and take up space by modeling. As-built, sorry, let me go back to that real quick. As-built is kind of important. This goes back to that spreadsheet with the numbers on it. If you're going to, as an architect or as an engineer, go back into your model and make changes because the design or the construction team found conditions that didn't fit and required a wall to move, you're going to have to go into your Revit file and move that wall. That's going to take you a little bit of time, so account for that. You know, we have, you know, we spell out what the submittals are going to be, both to the team that is doing this process and to the owner at the end of the job. Don't necessarily want Revit models because I can't control what they look like, what they have in them. I don't know that it's right. So the Nwc Exporter is free, and it creates a file that Navisworks can read, and it's a snapshot of exactly what you, the creator of the model, wants to have in that view. Set up a 3D view that has the export settings that you want, and just push that Nwc Exporter and share this with us. Much smaller files, much easier to deal with. Think of it as a 3D PDF. I can't go in there and change things. I can't change design options. I can't change level of detail. And we're nudging up against 1 o'clock, so I'm going to kind of speed up a little bit. But use the technology that's available to you. Instead of sharing files through email that have dates at the end of the file, you know, if you've got those naming conventions, but then you put April 15, 2015 at the end of the file. That means that that's a file that I have to go rename so that my XREFs into Navisworks continue to work. So, okay, that's easy to do. But what if you have to do that every time somebody uploads and you have 36 files that you have to do it to? It's a lot easier to use something like, say, Dropbox or ShareFile, in our case is what we do, which guess what? You upload, you overwrite the old one, it keeps the old version. I can go in there and I can check what the old versions of files were at any given time, so I can see a snapshot, but you can simply overwrite it. It'll sync with my computer. I open up Navisworks, new model is there. I've had to do nothing to it to make it work. So use the technology. Identify what the coordination cycle is, whether it be for design or for construction. That's when you say, let's upload by Tuesday night. And hey, little secret, when you're using this stuff and the naming conventions right, I have people ask me, when should we upload files before the meeting? Because we usually have to upload the night before, and then the meeting's not until 3 in the afternoon, and I do a bunch of stuff, and it's outdated. It's like, if you get it to me within 5 minutes of the meeting, it'll be in the meeting. And quite frankly, if you hit save and upload while we're in the meeting, I'll hit refresh and see your stuff live. So when you're using this stuff right, timing is not a limitation. And then we have a little bit, because this is part of the contract, this is a sign-off, basically, that says, yes, I've coordinated this, my stuff is where it needs to be, it's free, it clashes with everybody else, and we're going to build it this way. Because if you model it one way and then you go build it another way, it doesn't do you any good. You might as well have not modeled it. So everybody gets asked to sign off. And I would take this to the design side and say, we're going to do our best to model, our design intent the way that it's, that it's supposed to be. Now, that's kind of the big elephant in the room, right, is the whole thing with the level of detail. The biggest gripe that I hear is, well, we can't put that kind of level of detail into our models. It's not feasible. And I don't disagree with you. I think that I want to redefine level of detail. So I want to talk about the AGC level of development specification, which I have here. It's a free document you can download from the AGC. Just because it's AGC and not AIA doesn't mean that it's not relevant to designers. This is actually a very good guide for understanding how a BIM model can be used for building something. Now, this is not without its flaws, and it's something that evolves, but it's a pretty good place to start from. I would like to see most everybody model to a level 300, if not 350. Let me tell you what that means. So a level 350, for example, in an exterior wall, interior skin. So if you have a system where you have a wall cladding outside, different structure inside, you have an opening. I don't think that it's unfeasible to ask a designer to model the exterior system as a separate layer, if you will, a separate piece, and to identify the rough opening dimensions in the spot you want them and the size you want them. That's not means and methods. That's not something that contractors should be filling in. That's adequate design level of information. Not that difficult to put in, makes our life a lot easier. I showed you that that concrete model. Well, like I said, this is a section I've taken from it. There's nothing drafted here other than the tag for the footing and the elevations. Everything else, that hatch pattern for the slab insulation, that's modeled. That little bit of wood right there, that's modeled. That edge slab, that's modeled. Now that edge slab in Revit, it's lame. But it took me less to create this profile family that behaves the way I needed to in the model. It took me a lot less to create that family right there than it takes to draft just one section through a concrete slab. So that, to me, is obvious. I showed you guys earlier the interior wall framing. So all I really need to do to, with one click, create the studs here is for your wall layers to be right. And level of definition, the AGC, there's something kind of interesting in this document. Level of detail is how much you model. Level of definition is how much thought you put into what you model. So I'd be very happy to receive walls that have that outside line and that inside line of the wall exactly where it needs to be, and let's not worry about what goes in between. All those things we can fill in. But if you are calling out in your drawings a certain size stud, well, Revit makes it very easy to put all these layers in here. Very easy. And Revit is very good about taking that information, making sure that that wall is where it needs to be, making sure that rough opening is where it needs to be, and with one click, if that is set up right, with one click, this comes out. So it makes everybody's life a lot easier. So, you usually would care about where those lines are because you want those outside dimensions to be right and your clearances to be correct and your doors to be where you need them. So that's what's important there. And then either define this stuff so that we can do it or put that into your model. Pretty simple. I forget, there was some point that I was going to make about this, but, oh yeah. The different Revit wall families, they have a lot of information, but they don't know whether they go to 6 inches above the ceiling or all the way to the structure. Make sure that you model that right. You know, it's very easy to miss that because you're looking at a floor plan that looks at 4 feet down to about 2, and it cuts a section through that horizontal plane, and you can't see what's happening above. But for the purposes of this exercise, it's really great to know that the wall goes up to the structure or not. All right, we're on the home stretch. We're just about there. Then require BIM of your partners. In this case, I've got language here for our bid packages. Basically, this is for a PT cable detailer and PT scope. And we're saying here, you know what? We want these things modeled. Now, the reality is that I'm happy to take a rebar drawing or a PT drawing in 2D and overlay it with a model. And we'll talk about that. And most people can get away with that in those particular scopes where sometimes modeling is not necessary. So, you know, we can, there's some fudge factor there, some wiggle room. But the point is, if you're working on a project and your mechanical engineer comes to the meeting and they tell you that they don't really model anything in Revit, that they might just do some calcs or whatever with the spaces, you know, nudge them. Let's see, what can you do to bring them? It's like, what can we do, you know, to help you, to bring your standard of care to the same level, to bring your work to be useful in coordination during the design with us because we're going to model to this level of detail. Have that conversation. And if you are in a position to do so, contractually, then require it. All right. Training, for us, training is a bit of a big deal. Everybody wants to get trained in innovation in BIM, but I'm not going to train my project managers to use Revit. So you got to be very, very targeted about what you're training. Train for the tools that really bring value. But there's something that there's a quote, and I don't know who said it, but it's not mine. But the only thing worse than training your employees and having them leave, which is a fear that a lot of us have, I'm going to invest all this money on this employee, going to make them an expert at Revit, and then they're going to get a better paying job somewhere else using Revit. The other thing worse than that is to not training, having them suck at Revit and stay working for you. So anyway, all the tools that you're going to use, you got to be able to use them effectively. You got to, you got to be somewhat of an expert at these things or have somebody who's an expert at these things. So make sure that you're providing for training for that. And with that, I've shown you my entire implementation plan. And with just a few minutes to spare, I've managed to eke it out. So timing's been pretty decent. So there are people that I work with that I include this in every email I send them because this is how they behave. And this kind of goes back to it would actually be worth it to stop and switch out these wheels, if that's what you want to call them, however long it takes to do that. So, BIM tools, Revit, some of this implementation plan, doing some of the lean thinking, sometimes can feel that way. It can feel like now we got to stop and switch gears and do this different from what we've always been doing, and I'm not really prepared to do that. So that's a pretty good analogy of it. But anyway, with that, I'll open up to questions, comments, questions, heckling. Yes?
Theoretically, everyone believes that people or organizations shouldn't work in silos. It keeps happening. What would you say are some of the human obstacles to breaking out of silos?
So I'll repeat the question so it's in the recording. Everybody believes that collaborating is better and everybody wants to collaborate, but it keeps not happening. So what are some of the human factors that limit that? I think I've captured the question accurately. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not even that big of a people person. So I might not have the answer for that. But I think that, somebody once said that BIM is 90% sociology and 10% technology or whatever, and I think is very true. It's hard to get people out of their mindset. So, however, I don't necessarily believe that it's so much a people person as it is a contract problem. Our contracts, our business models, our bottom lines are still very much informed by a model that looks after our business, our silo. Let's face it, there are subcontractors that, knowing that they could make more money by letting things slip and then having a big change order, prefer to collaborate and find the issues so that the job goes smoother, because they know that they're very likely are going to be in a position of going after more work with that team, and they don't want that history because it's really no longer about lowest bidder anymore. You know, that's phasing out quicker than I think anybody can anticipate. So it's going to be similar, you know, and it's going to be, you're going to do a project at some point with a team that is very collaborative, with an owner that required it and fostered it and really allowed you to work within it. And you know, you might even come across a client that says, you know what, let's use the model as the contract. Let's build from the model. Let's really figure out what it takes to do that. I'm willing to pay for it. And you're going to come out of that project, and if it all goes well and it's a successful project, you're probably going to want to do that again. You know, so it's going to take that. It's a slow evolution, unfortunately. I think that all of us in this room are probably here because we believe in it, and we have to do what we can to push it. And some of us might not be in a situation to push it, but you know, it could be something as simple as, you know, well, I know that I'm not really supposed to go back and change that because we didn't put any money in our contract for going back and as-building, but you know what, these guys really could use an updated model, and it would take me only a half an hour. I'm going to choose to do it. Breaking the law. You know, live on the edge a little. I don't know, it's hard to change. But we have to, inevitably. Or those who don't will inevitably be left behind. Because at some point, the pendulum's going to swing, the momentum's going to be on the other side. And just like the technology has taken hold, the mentality is going to take hold. And all of a sudden, you will be a designer or an engineer or a contractor that does low-bid work, and that's all you do, and you work in your silo, and that work will be less and less and less. And in order to get the negotiated projects, in order to get onto a design and construction or design build team to do a project for a client, you will have to have had experience working in a design build team, and you're gonna get awarded a project not because your design is the best, but because you worked with this project and this client before and you had a really successful time. UW is a perfect example. They've seen the light, they've had the success, they're not gonna hire anybody to do something any other way. More and more clients are going to be that way. So do you want to be the design team that resisted that, or do you want to be the design team that can come to the table with, yeah, we've got a whole portfolio of projects we've done collaboratively, you know, that we've provided BIM services on. So it's worth it to figure out, again, going back to this, worth it to figure out a way to convince your clients to pay for it. Change your business model so they can adopt this. I mean, nobody's suggesting you lose money on stuff. You know, I think that's not sustainable either. So that's why I say it's very important to be honest about what it costs and to account for it. Yes?
And I think one of the biggest challenges also is finding people that are trained to do it. You know, if you have contractors that are obligated to provide these 3D content for coordination and implementation, finding a team for a company that did historically provide that level of service, finding an electrical contractor who has electrical 3D modeling staff and detailing staff to provide that is challenging. They sign up because they want the project, and then they can't deliver. And 10 stories in, they're 5 floors behind because they just simply don't have the staff.
Yeah, well, get it for the recording. It's sometimes it's hard to, you know, you come up with a company that maybe they're claiming they can do something and they want to do it, and they come with the table saying that they can do it, and then they can't because they haven't trained their staff. Well, those things get fleshed out pretty quickly. I mean, I can tell you, we don't do low bid work. You know, a couple of public projects have forced us to bid out some scopes, but for the most part, our work is relationship based. And I know what contractor made my life easy during coordination, and I know what subcontractors did not. So when we're starting a project and somebody comes across my desk with, yeah, these guys want to be involved in it, I'm like, you know what? These guys subbed it out and it became a pain in the neck and we lost our shirt because of something that happened. You think that subcontractor's going to get pretty high priority on the list? You know, I mean, we're a company that gives people second chances, right? So I mean, people grow, people learn, we'll evaluate it, but the reality is that sticks with you. So that's going to trickle to the rest of the industry as well. It's relationship based, and you'll know who you can work with and who you can't.
To add to that comment, though, about not having quality staff, or, they come in and they say they're going to have someone, in-house do this, or they sub it out and it doesn't work with it. If you come to a contractor and you say, hey, I want this contract, but I don't have the skills with this, we've actually gone out and we've trained the trades how to use the software to work with us. It's being open and honest immediately, saying, hey, I want to work with you guys, I just can't do it. Come to us, and we've sent our BIM coordinators out, and they've worked in their offices collaboratively to get them up to speed.
We'll take it a step further. We've actually bought AutoCAD MEP for people that wanted to participate, people we liked, people we had relationships with who were great out in the field, but say, look, we just don't have anybody, can't really make the investment in the design suite. But you know what, we'll buy it. We'll buy it, you pay for the training. How about that? We'll split it. Very successful project. Yeah, you had a question.
Just out of curiosity, primarily most projects that use BEPs is because it's generated by the owner. It's an owner request issue. How many projects do you guys do where you do that plan without an owner request?
How many projects do we have without the owners requesting it, that we're doing it anyway? Too many. It's just, I would like to think that we're going to get the owners more involved, and it's, we have to do a lot of education towards our owners, but most projects, UW is a little bit of an odd case. I think I'm seeing the momentum headed in that direction, but the reality is there's a lot of jobs where we take the hit financially to do these things because we believe it's going to give us an insurance policy during the actual work. So we can be more profitable by doing it than by not doing it. But yeah, we're kind of on our own deciding to do the work.
Which BIM tools do you guys use that you feel are underutilized?
What BIM tools we use that we feel are underutilized? I don't know if they're underutilized. If we use them, we're using them. We use Revit to a great extent. Like I said, I'm not going to show a project manager how to use Revit, but I'm going to show a superintendent or a concrete foreman how to use SketchUp. SketchUp gets a lot of flack. Oh, SketchUp's not BIM. Maybe it's not, but when there's a footing step that somebody wants to show me how it is, it's very easy for somebody to go in and use SketchUp. SketchUp kind of gets underutilized. It doesn't become part of a big database, but I would say SketchUp probably is one that gets the worst deal. But anyway, we've run out of time, and I've got some gifts to give out. So why don't we wrap it up there, and I'll stick around a little bit if you have any other questions. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time. And Jesse, do you want, thank you.